Right now, there is a very good chance you have a pouch, a jar, or a canister in your kitchen that a congressional investigation flagged as a problem, and the brand has never told you a word about it. This video is about the baby food industry's heavy metals scandal. You have probably seen headlines about it, but almost every video on this topic stops at the scary number and never explains the actual mechanism, how companies have been getting away with it for years, why some of the foods you'd least expect are on the worst offender list, and what the 4 brands actually worth buying look like compared to the rest. We are going to go through all of it, and I want you to stay until the end because the last point is the one that completely reframes everything you think you know about how to protect your baby from this. It is not about avoiding one bad jar. It is something much bigger than that, and it changes your whole approach. Let's start. Number 10. The organic label is doing absolutely nothing for you here. This is the one that catches parents off guard the most. You see organic, you assume safer. And for pesticides, that logic holds. But heavy metals, arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury come from soil and water, not from farming practices. They are not added on purpose. They reach baby food through the soil, water, and air that the underlying crops grow in, and through processing equipment. Organic certification has no requirement to test for or limit heavy metals. So a certified organic sweet potato pouch can carry just as much lead as a conventional one, sometimes more, depending on where the crops were grown. The word organic on a baby food label tells you about pesticide practices. It tells you nothing, zero, about heavy metal content. And that distinction matters enormously when you're choosing what to feed a 6-month-old every single day. Number 9. The spices and add-ins hiding in healthy recipes are a source almost nobody is talking about. Everyone blames rice cereal. Rice is a real problem, and we will get to it. But the research goes further than that. Many manufacturers use additional ingredients that test positive for heavy metals, including vitamin premixes, enzymes, and flavorings like cinnamon, cumin, and turmeric. Think about that for a second. A cinnamon oatmeal pouch marketed as a wholesome breakfast option could be pulling heavy metal exposure from the spice blend, not just the grain. The oat base looks fine on paper. The cinnamon does not, and because companies test ingredients separately rather than the finished blended product, that combination effect gets missed entirely. Which brings us to the loophole at the center of this whole scandal. Number 8. Companies test ingredients before mixing, not the finished product you actually feed your baby. And that is not an accident. This is the actual story buried in the congressional investigation, and it is the thing most videos skip over. Companies rarely test finished products for heavy metals. Instead, they rely primarily on tests of individual ingredients, which consistently leads to underestimates of the levels of heavy metals in finished products. Read that again. They test the ingredients one by one before they are combined, cooked, and concentrated. When you blend multiple ingredients that each carry trace amounts of heavy metals, the finished product can come in significantly higher than any individual ingredient suggested. The companies know this, and for years the testing process was designed in a way that made it easy to stay technically compliant while the actual jar on your shelf was a different story. That is not a regulatory gap. That is a deliberate structural choice. Number 7. Beechnut's own ingredient testing failed to catch what was actually in the finished product, and they shipped it anyway. The recall was announced when a routine sampling program run by the state of Alaska found that Beechnut Stage 1 single-grain rice cereal tested above the guidance level for naturally occurring inorganic arsenic set by the FDA. Here is the part that should make your jaw drop. Beechnut acknowledged that the product had levels of inorganic arsenic above the FDA guidance level, even though the rice flour used to produce these products tested below the FDA guidance level for inorganic arsenic. So the ingredient passed. The finished product failed. That is exactly the mechanism from the last point playing out in real life, with a real brand and a real recall. At the same time, Beechnut announced it was permanently exiting the rice cereal market, saying it could not consistently source rice flour reliably below the FDA guidance level, and internal documents made it worse. Internal testing revealed alarming figures with arsenic levels in certain Beechnut baby food ingredients reaching as high as 913 parts per billion, and lead levels climbing to 886 parts per billion. Those amounts far exceed the limits considered safe for other products like bottled water, which is capped at just 10 parts per billion for arsenic and 5 parts per billion for lead. Number 6. Companies have been routinely ignoring their own internal safety limits, not just the government's. The conversation about baby food regulation usually goes like this. The government has weak rules, so companies do whatever they want. That framing lets the companies off too easy. The real story is worse. Internal company standards allowed for dangerously high levels of these toxins. Even more concerning, tested ingredients often exceeded even these exceptionally high standards, meaning large amounts of children consumed baby food contaminated with toxic levels of heavy metals, despite the product being labeled as safe and natural. They set their own threshold, they broke their own threshold, and then they kept selling. That is not a regulatory failure. That is a company choosing sales over safety by their own stated standards. Number 5. 3 major companies stonewalled the congressional investigation, and one of them was quietly sold mid-scandal. When the first congressional subcommittee report came out in 2021, not every company cooperated. The subcommittee later released data from the 3 manufacturers that had not responded to the initial request. Plum Organics, which was owned by Campbell's when the first report came out, but was sold to Sun-Maid in May 2021, along with Sprout Foods and Walmart. Think about the timing there. A congressional investigation is underway. A major brand changes ownership in the middle of it. The accountability just quietly shifted hands. And the second report, the follow-up investigation, only happened because the first round of companies did not cooperate. So the entire second wave of scrutiny exists because companies tried to wait it out. That is, they tried to hide a timeline that almost no one tells you about in the right order. And since we are talking about Sprout, their testing practices deserve their own entry. Number 4. Sprout Foods tested their products once a year. Once. Sprout's approach to safety allowed their ingredient manufacturers to test only once a year, and Sprout did not test their finished products at all. Once a year, for a product going into the mouths of infants every single day. That is not a company that made a mistake. That is a company that built a testing schedule that made catching problems nearly impossible. And remember, this is the same company that refused to cooperate with the initial congressional investigation. The pattern is consistent. I told you at the start, there was a point that would reframe everything. We are almost there. But first, if this is the kind of deep dive content you want to see more of, hit subscribe right now, and drop a comment below telling me which brand you have been using. I genuinely read every single one, and it helps me know what to cover next. Let's keep going. Number 3. The list of worst offender foods includes things you would never expect. Most people picture a jar of rice cereal when they think about this issue, but investigators submitted a report identifying the top 15 most consumed foods by children under age 2, that they estimated accounted for 55% of the risk to brain development due to heavy metal content. And that list includes apple juice and grape juice. Not just jarred purees, not just rice puffs. Juice. The thing parents reach for because it feels like a fruit. Some fruit juices, especially apple and grape, have historically tested above the new lead action levels. So if you have been skipping the rice cereal and handing your toddler a juice box instead, you have not necessarily solved the problem. The exposure is coming from more directions than most parents realize. Number 2. The federal government still does not have binding limits on most of these metals in finished baby food. Most parents assume there is already a legal ceiling, some number a company cannot cross, or the product gets pulled. The reality is more complicated. In January 2025, the FDA issued final guidance for lead in baby food, but has still not finalized action levels for other toxic heavy metals. While these guidelines are not legally enforceable, they represent a regulatory effort to reduce the risks associated with dietary lead exposure in young children. Cadmium draft levels were published in 2026, with final guidance still pending. For arsenic, mercury, and cadmium in most finished baby food categories, there is still no binding federal limit. After multiple industry-leading baby food brands were found to have products with toxic levels of heavy metals and poor manufacturing processes, several states took action to require more transparency. California now requires baby food manufacturers to publish test results for their products. Maryland followed, but that is state-by-state patchwork, not a national standard. As one consumer advocate put it, the FDA has left parents with the burden of researching every product they buy. And that brings us to the one that changes your whole approach. Number 1. This is never about one jar. It is about cumulative exposure over months of near-exclusive feeding. This is the framing that pediatric researchers actually use, and it is the most important thing in this entire video. As Dr. Philip Landrigan, A pediatrician and researcher at Boston College explains, arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals are known causes of neurodevelopmental harm. Low-level exposures add up, and exposures in early life are especially dangerous. The cumulative impact of exposures is what makes this a significant concern that demands action. No single jar is going to poison your baby. That is not the argument, and anyone making that argument is oversimplifying. The real risk is a baby eating from a narrow rotation of the same products, multiple times a day, for the first year of life. Babies and toddlers are more vulnerable than adults to even small exposures because their nervous systems are developing. Their gut absorbs a higher fraction of what they eat, and their dose per kilogram of body weight is higher for the same serving size. So the fix is not panic. The fix is variety and information. Rotate ingredients. Avoid relying on any single product as a staple. And choose brands that actually publish their finished product test results. So, which brands are actually doing this right? The 4 worth your attention share one thing. They test finished products, not just raw ingredients, and they make those results publicly accessible without requiring you to call a hotline. Look for brands that publish batch-level or lot-level heavy metal data directly on their website. California law now requires baby food manufacturers to publish test results for their products, and that data, along with third-party testing, consumer safety reports, and independent databases, have helped identify brands with lower levels of heavy metals. Look for brands that publish third-party heavy metal testing results, and only trust brands that are transparent about this. The brands that meet that bar right now are the ones worth your money. The ones that test only once a year, test only ingredients, or make you jump through hoops to find any data at all. Those are the ones to put back on the shelf. Here is where we started. You probably had no idea that the testing loophole was the real story, not just the metals themselves. You did not know that a company could pass its own ingredient tests and still ship a product that fails when the finished jar is tested. You did not know that juice made the worst offender list. And you did not know that the second congressional report only exists because companies stonewalled the first one. Now you do. And the single most protective thing you can do, starting today, is rotate your baby's diet and only buy from brands that publish their finished product test results. That one shift closes more of the risk than any single brand swap ever could. If you want to go even deeper on this, watch the video coming up next. And if this video helped you, share it with another parent. They deserve to know this too.